President Trump has issued a new executive order. Technically, it's a modification of an executive order that was first issued by President Carter back in 1979. The topic of the order is excluding agencies from the Federal Labor Management Relations Program. As most of you probably know, the Civil Service Reform Act was passed in 1978, largely through the efforts of President Carter and also with a lot of assistance from the AFGE national president at the time, Ken Blaylock. But there were some types of agencies that were specifically excluded from coverage of the Labor Relations Program. When he was president, President Carter issued this executive order, number 12171, and it explained which agencies would be excluded. Now, President Trump has taken that to a much different level. And as you can see from the chart that we're putting up, this one excludes a lot more agencies. In fact, the exact number of people who'd be impacted is probably difficult to calculate, but I would guess that it would exclude maybe 70% of the federal workforce from coverage by the Labor Relations Statute. So it's important for that reason. In effect, it modifies the Civil Service Reform Act so that it doesn't cover a large percentage of the federal workforce. That's the intent. And here's the reason behind it. The Civil Service Reform Act in 5 U.S.C. Section 7103 lists what the president can do with regard to excluding agencies from the coverage of the law. Now, the reason for that is national security in a broad sense. Now, what constitutes national security uh, depends upon who's making the definition or who's making the decision. And in this case, President Trump wants to exclude unions from covering a number of these agencies. And they're big agencies, Department of Defense, uh, State Department, large parts of HHS, GSA. So you're talking about major federal agencies, and most of their employees would be excluded from coverage. So that means, in effect, that unions wouldn't exist. They couldn't organize, they couldn't negotiate collective bargaining agreements. They wouldn't be representing people in grievances, at least not under the negotiated grievance procedure that most federal employees probably have access to. But what the law does is it gives the president a lot of authority, and it's very direct. And here's what it says. It says the president may issue an order excluding any agency or subdivision from coverage under this chapter of the law. So it's strictly within his purview, at least as the law is written. If he makes these determinations, first, the agency or the subdivision of the agency has a primary function involving intelligence, counterintelligence, investigative, or national security work. Second, the provisions of the chapter can't be applied to that agency consistent with national security requirements and considerations. And again, that's within the purview of the president to make that decision. Now, the president may issue an order suspending any provision of the law with respect to any agency, installation, or activity located outside the 50 states and the District of Columbia if he determines that the suspension is necessary for national security. So the law gives him a great deal of discretion, it gives him a great deal of power, and with this new executive order, the president is taking advantage of that uh, to exclude a lot of people. So, why? What has happened that has led to this? Well, I don't think it's coincidental. There are at least 12 lawsuits that unions have filed, and 12 is probably a pretty low number because it excludes any redundant lawsuits concerning the same issues. It's filed by different unions in different courts, that kind of thing. President issued a fact sheet to go along with this new executive order. And the fact sheet displays his view of unions in the government and how they're helping or hurting the efficiency or effectiveness of the federal government workforce. And obviously, as you can imagine, this is not a favorable impression of unions. So the fact sheet reflects this opinion. It says that the Civil Service Reform Act enables hostile federal unions to obstruct agency management. And this is dangerous in agencies that have national security responsibilities. Now, that term hostile isn't my term. Uh, that's what the fact sheet says. Secondly, it says agencies cannot modify policies and collective bargaining agreements until they expire. Moreover, under the Biden administration, political appointees worked with the unions in charge of the agencies to give the unions the right. They willingly cooperated with the unions to negotiate contracts with provisions, including telework as an example, that did not expire until after the second Trump term had passed. A new president was elected. Now, presumably, the political appointees under Biden were thinking, well, the next president may very well be a Democrat, so this is beneficial to the unions. We like the unions. We want to probably make it more difficult to Trump to do things like end telework. And that is one of the items listed in this fact sheet as to why he wants to exclude these agencies from the Civil Service Reform Act, or at least the labor relations portion of it, because they're obstructing effective efficiency agency management. Said unions use these powers to block implementing the VA Accountability Act, and the VA is one of the agencies that would be excluded for national security under this executive order. The agency had to offer reinstatement of back pay to over 4,000 unionized employees that the VA had removed for poor performance or misconduct. And those are the kind of things that the administration says they want to avoid having, and it's hurting national security, as determined by the president. And their contention is that the president has the authority to make this decision based on the language I cited just a few minutes ago. The fact sheet also says that unions have declared war on the Trump agenda, specifically what at least one or two federal unions have said in press releases or documents that have become available. He said that the union obstruction interferes with protecting Americans and our national interests. And what he's talking about here is not just the military, not just agencies like the CIA, are obviously involved in intelligence activities, but also agencies involved in border security, uh, and getting rid of, deporting, for example, people who are here illegally, under the large number of illegals that walked across the border with the help or encouragement of the Biden administration. Said the Biden administration renegotiated union contracts to last through President Trump's second term. So these are the kind of things that are leading to this executive order being issued. Now, the purpose of the title is a modification of the Carter executive order, is in part for political reasons. In other words, the administration is saying this isn't just our idea. President Carter did this back in 1979. We're doing the same thing. We're just expanding the agencies that are excluded because of problems that have come up in dealing with unions. There's a certain amount of irony in some of this. Uh, President Trump, in his first term, issued executive orders that were basically against unions. By that I mean they restricted unions' benefits. They restricted official time, for example. And official time just means that a federal employee is working on behalf of a union, continues to receive the pay and benefits of a federal employee, but isn't doing the work he or she was hired for. Instead, they're working on behalf of the union in certain areas. So by restricting this time, in effect, it increases the cost or efficiency of the unions. They were also doing things like charging unions rent for office space, charging for the use of government equipment, etc. So that showed his attitude toward the unions, and that's carried over into the second term. There are a couple of interesting side notes or ramifications of this new executive order. It's likely to go to the U.S. Supreme Court. Obviously, the unions are going to file lawsuits. In fact, by the time you're seeing this video, the lawsuits have probably already been filed. One of the justices that would likely hear this case is Judge Ketanji Brown Jackson. When she was a circuit court judge, she had issued a decision involving labor relations in the government and found in favor of the unions to overturn a number of the Trump executive orders. That decision was overturned by the Court of Appeals. And in fact, by the time the Court of Appeals got that case and issued a decision, President Biden had put Ketanji Brown Jackson on that Court of Appeals. The Court of Appeals overturned her decision. She did not appear in that decision or did not participate in voting on that decision. She recused herself, which was appropriate. However, if this case gets to the Supreme Court, which is likely, then she'll be in a position to look at this issue again that she has ruled on previously. So that doesn't affect necessarily how the decision will be voted on by the Supreme Court. There's 9 justices, so there may be a 6-3 decision. But a lot of times this Supreme Court surprises people and you end up with very close decisions, one vote one way or the other. The judges have lifetime appointments. They don't always vote in the same way that you might expect on a case. So we'll see what happens with this case. In any event, there's going to be a number of these cases that get to court. Judge Jackson moved up fast. President Biden put her on the Court of Appeals, then subsequently nominated her to the Supreme Court. The Senate confirmed her, so that's where she'll be for probably for many years to come. So it's an interesting side note involving this particular justice and how what goes around comes around. The Court of Appeals overturned her decision before. This time around, when she's on the Supreme Court, she'll probably may get a chance, or probably will get a chance, to vote on similar issues again. Thank you for watching. We hope you've found this video useful. There are articles on this topic on the FedSmith website. We hope you'll take an opportunity to look at them. Subscribe to the videos, subscribe to the free newsletter if you choose to do so. And we're glad you're here. We hope you find this video and these articles useful to those in the federal community. Thanks for watching.